there is a gap in terms of, not knowing enough about how customer success matures and the priorities change as the stages change. There is lots of content about HR, about sales, about marketing. What do you focus early on, what do you focus the growth stage, what do you focus on a scale stage. But I think there's not enough or hardly any content which sort of segregates these stages.
If you look at Salesforce, they have a role for everything, right? Like they have an architect that works with the CSM, that works with the TAM, that works with several people for their enterprise level customers. And that just speaks to the scale of those customers, right? When you have accounts that are 10 million, 20 million, you're now talking and I'm talking in ARR, right? 10 million, 20 million in 1 year. You now owe them a different level of support and success. And that's where I think we start to see those shifts. The one thing I think we do wrong as CS teams, and I'm not like saying that people don't do this, but I think customers' goals and maturity or customers' goals change as their maturity
Yes.
evolves in your product. Not even as they mature as individual companies, but as they use your product, they might stop doing certain things.
I hope there is a level of understanding of standardization that comes. And you make the metrics part look so simple. Don't think too much. Start with basics. Start doing something. Mature as it goes. And that makes so much sense because we end up doing so much of research and analysis and forget the basics. Like at least get started and then you'll figure as you. Hello and welcome to the Scale Tail podcast. I'm your host, Mossy, and I'm back with another exciting episode featuring an incredible guest. Today's topic is a crucial one for growing startups. We're going to talk about customer success strategies for startups at different stages of its scale. And to talk on this topic, I'm thrilled to welcome Parul Bhandari. She is a seasoned CS professional, a consultant. She specializes in driving exceptional customer experiences for SaaS teams, VCs, Ps. She brings a unique blend of expertise in executive management, HR, AI, and has successfully helped companies build and scale customer success programs. She has also written a children's book, which I just got to know. And along with that, she also does a lot of work for customer success community. For those of you who don't know, Parul was kind enough to join us in one of our CS events in August this year as a panelist, and we had an amazing time. So, Parul, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here. I'm so excited about this conversation.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
How have you been?
I've been busy in a good way. So I've got my hands in a couple of projects, as you mentioned. So I am enjoying all of that time, but also doing client work, which is, kind of what keeps us going as customer success people.
What we would really like to know before we begin is how your journey has been in customer success and what's cooking next.
Absolutely. I think like many people in customer success, I didn't start in a traditional sort of tech, workspace even. I started my career out of master's as an occupational ergonomist. And I essentially was a consultant serving manufacturing clients and essentially helping them to reduce injuries in their workspace. So my focus I'm still an ergonomist to be frank. And for the last like 20 plus years had been focused on wellness and driving sort of those safety and health programs. I took a little break. I went and got my MBA and I worked in HR for a couple of years. I really enjoyed the operational learning that I got from HR. I didn't, unfortunately, enjoy being in a recession as an HR manager. So it was post 2008 recession. So after that, I decided to come back to ergonomics for some time. Meanwhile, the company that I had been working at, they actually became a SaaS startup. So they went from being a 40-year-old consultancy to a SaaS startup, had developed 2 software platforms, and were selling them actively. So I was gone for like 5 years, 3 years of selling those products actively. As a fresh out of MBA, kind of like inquisitive person, I started diving into some data going, what's going on here? And we recognized these customers have been sold and kind of like set up and let go on their way, the old way of SaaS, but they weren't necessarily succeeding, right? And some of them had churned and we didn't even know it. So we understood there was a gap. I started talking to the sales team, started talking to the leadership team, and I got the chance to build my first customer success team from the ground up. The cool thing was that I did every single thing, reading the books that were available at the time and really building systematically. We even had CSP at that time, which, that early stage companies typically don't get. But the backbone of our company was that we had customers. And I think that is a little bit of in stark contrast to like the customers I deal with today, the clients I have today. So I can talk a little bit about that later. But we had customers, we had a really strong base. So I was able to start a customer success process and do a lot of like live testing and get it right. And I really fell in love with that build phase. So later that company got acquired, we became a large entity, and it was great. I learned so much there, but I really missed like going back to build. So I joined another startup and then another startup after that. And then most recently, after I think just kind of having a personal sort of drive to do something different and build my own thing, I had the chance to start South Asian Success first and then Customer X Success, which is sort of my foray into this space, saying, hey, I want to help startups build customer experiences that are lasting, and start very, very early. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on today. And then what else am I focusing on? You said, what's next? What's next? So this year's been a big year for me already. But I got the chance to do some cool things, and I got involved with a couple of folks, Jenny Calvert and Lawrence Waldron, and we're putting together a podcast that's coming out soon. And Mostly knows about this, near and dear to our heart, because Mostly was our first official guest. But we're talking about success at different stages, because we know that customer success has had this sort of crisis ongoing for the last 20 years of like, who are we? What do we look like? And how do we really deliver value? And I think that there are models that vary as we dive into customer success at different stages. And so we want to talk to practitioners and non-CS practitioners and really dive into some of those topics to help our field grow and mature in the way that it needs to.
I think that's there is a gap in terms of, not knowing enough about how customer success matures and the priorities change as the stages change. There is lots of content about HR, about sales, about marketing. What do you focus early on, what do you focus the growth stage, what do you focus on a scale stage. But I think there's not enough or hardly any content which sort of segregates these stages along with different verticals. There is so many variations, but the stages change and the entire customer success perspective of an organization changes. So I think that's something which is very important to be talked about based on the experiences of people like yourself who have actually done it on the ground, right? You've built the whole customer success for multiple companies from grounds up, and that brings so much of real practical knowledge. And I think that's what can be extremely valuable to my audience if you can share some of the concepts and what they need to focus on at different stages.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think obviously everything that we say is with a little bit of a generalization, but like as a baseline, if I look across different types of functions and I think of like brand management, I worked in CPG for a while. So I think of brand management and like, what does brand management at CPG look like? It's very clear. When we would hire folks into that function, they could pivot and move to other companies, and those companies were confident in that person's skill sets. I don't know that we can say the same for customer success. So I really think it fundamentally starts with like how we design our teams and how we design our organizations. What I see as a trend, and what I think others have sort of agreed with, is in the early stage, we tend to be like a jack of all trades kind of a CSM. And in fact, it is a really great training ground if you want to learn everything about the function and you want to maybe explore all the niches. Typically, a CS person in an early stage company might own onboarding or might own renewals or might own it all, frankly. And those things are not uncommon because you're typically dealing with budgets and you're dealing with, headcount expectations and boards and things like that. As companies grow and evolve, we start to see the segregation, like the pulling apart of these functions. And that's probably number one due to simply to scale and time, right? Like as you grow bigger, and I worked in an organization, we had a renewals team. it didn't really, like, today, if I think about it, in a lot of my early stage companies, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have a renewals team. But at that company, that team was super effective because they would spend so much time and energy on that. They had refined their skill set and they were actually bringing more and more revenue into the company doing what they did. They became specialists. I think that that specialist growth, and I think I've heard you say this too, is like something that we start to see as we get larger. When we go to the really big companies, like if you look at Salesforce, they have a role for everything, right? Like they have an architect that works with the CSM, that works with the TAM, that works with several people for their enterprise level customers. And that just speaks to the scale of those customers, right? When you have accounts that are 10 million, 20 million, you're now talking and I'm talking in ARR, right? 10 million, 20 million in 1 year. You now owe them a different level of support and success. And that's where I think we start to see those shifts. If it was so simple though, why doesn't everyone just follow that? I think the problem is we kind of, in those early stages, we kind of throw things out and see what sticks. And every organization does it differently. Every CS leader has a different idea. And by doing that, what we do is we sort of undercut, I think, our value as an organization. And this is just my 2 cents, right? That if we had a little more standardization, I think we could actually speak more clearly to our value prop.
Absolutely. And at times what happens is, when you're doing this structuring, we tend to sometimes, a lot of people I've seen would discuss this with me. They tend to go to always think about segregating too early or creating those stuff early. And they always think that maybe we are not doing it right because that's the conversation outside. And if you start doing things or segregating teams too early, what do you think? I think it's probably detrimental. Like there is a time for every strategy to come into the picture.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you. In the post-sale journey, right? If we think about all the steps that happen, if you have too many touch points, your customer will also notice that.
Yes.
So I'll tell you actually a story of what I think, a situation that I think could go awry, right? So landing up at a startup where they have an onboarding team and a customer success team that are owned by different leaders. Those leaders have different priorities. Onboarding might be guided by driving efficiency, reducing time to value, this, that, the other, right? CS team is measured by retention renewals. The metrics don't match. So when an onboarding team member delivers that onboarding fast, a CS team member might say, that was too fast. Customer wasn't ready. There might be a mismatch. If you were 2 teams under one umbrella, customer experience, a lot of people like to call it that, or you can call it whatever you want. Now you change the game because now you've got this operational focus to say, hey, we have one goal, retention and also time to value, but we all are working towards this goal. So CSM might peek into that onboarding and say, let me help with training, let me help enable that customer, help with transition. You can actually build more fluid workflows and you can still have segregation. But in those early stages, you could even have that flow even more, right? A CSM could be that onboarding person. I would say, in my opinion, if you're actually looking to say, should a CSM do onboarding or not? I think the best indicator of that is your product. How difficult is it to onboard that product? Is it highly technical? That's when maybe more team members are needed to do some engineering or to actually build, some configuration. But other than that, like if your product's not telling you to do it, you don't necessarily have to segment and segregate. I don't know how you feel about that in your in like world that you're doing it now too.
Like I think if the foundation isn't built yet and you start building your the entire levels on top of it, it stand properly. So the foundation of understanding of where you segregate and that alignment of goals is what you're talking about. I think that makes so much sense. That's what we all struggle with every day. Aligning, like early stage startup, my job is every day to align goals of every different team, not just customer success, but customer sales, everybody. And that is a challenge always because everybody has different metrics. So to align those KPIs and then eventually when the understanding is set, segregate those things and make so much sense. The other question that I have is, as you scale, right, it becomes pretty complex in terms of structuring, the metrics around what to track, where to track, and then different stages as you grow. The entire customer success process becomes a little bit more complex, right? So how do you
Yeah.
look at that in terms of tracking those metrics and maybe eventually aligning them to the benefits that CSMs or the motivations, let's say the motivations of these team members at different stages?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, right now I'm working with like a very early stage company, and we're already thinking about like what are metrics for success that we can share back with the customer. And I think obviously, even at the very early days, you can track things that are simplistic. Customers want to know, typically early customers want to know, hey, I've got people, I've signed up my team onto this. Are they actually going in there and doing it? Utilization is pretty undervalued in our field, but utilization actually speaks to, are people going in, and is your product sticky, or are there areas for you to train further?
Mhm.
So, that can be a simple one that you can start even with very little data about your customer. But I definitely think it, goes back to understanding what is it that they're coming into your product to do, and trying at a very, very basic level to track that. Obviously, success plans are key here, and talking with your customer and understanding their needs. The one thing I think we do wrong as CS teams, and I'm not like saying that people don't do this, but I think customers' goals and maturity defines, or customers' goals change as their maturity
Yes.
evolves in your product. Not even as they mature as individual companies, but as they use your product, they might stop doing certain things. I worked in health and safety. If they used our product well, they actually should be using it less, because it's reducing injuries, it's reducing issues. So technically, you're going to see less incidents occurring, right? Or you'll see more, less like escalations that they would have to worry about. That kind of maturity and that kind of behavior doesn't mean, oh no, well, I expect them not to log in. No, you have to actually build new things. And that's where your product roadmap also comes in, that actually scale with your customers' maturity in your product. And so I think your metrics will change, right? I think those early metrics, like get track whatever you can. I tell people, I'm like, put that usage. Now you can use like any tool for free. You can get a freemium, get some usage tracking in there. Just track what they're doing, watch their behavior, and then watch that behavior evolve. Because as your early stage, you're growing up with them, see what changes. I noticed, I don't know if you've seen this, I had a group of customers that every 3 years, and now it might be more frequent, but every 3 years we would see turnover, we would see business change. So they typically would put someone else in the role, and we had always in every 3 years maturity, but also we had a new person, so we had to resell our value proposition and re-engage them. So there were certain markers that you would almost, it's not like a measurable thing to say somebody changed, but it's a thing that you can cause, like build a trigger in your tooling and say, hey, I'm going to watch for this maturity cycle in my customers, right? um and obviously the things I'm talking about are industry specific, but I think that we are seeing those types of changes happen more and more in many industries, where 2 to 3 years there is a seniority change, somebody gets promoted or whatever, so you usually do see some sort of change. So I think, yeah, for me it's like a lot about understanding how is my customer going to use my product different, and building your metrics and things to align with that.
I think the point that you said, that as the customer matures in the product, the requirements change. And I think that is something that we are seeing currently in our business every day. Like the early stage customers were very happy and they were using certain things. And after a stage, like there is a wow in the beginning, and then
Yeah.
gets into a, business as usual. And then they expect another maturity level and they say, okay, whatever you're giving me is amazing, but can you also do this? And then
Yeah.
the feature request and everything starts coming in. And that's what we are also learning every day. That, they love what we have, but they want more now. Because now
Yeah.
we need to do more. You have this, why can't you do this? I said, yes, we are working on that. We'll add that. But that maturity cycle with, of course, the maturity of the customer, and also the second part where the CS head leaves and somebody else joins as the leader of the program. There is a completely new sales cycle, of course, in a way of
Yeah.
selling, because whoever is coming probably is coming from a completely different company, generally.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Yeah.
have a way of looking at CS, right? Because of the problem with standardization. There is no standard
Mm-hmm.
process across. So whoever comes from a different organization expects a completely different mindset. And hopefully, with people like yourself talking about CS in different forums, I hope there is a level of understanding of standardization that comes. And you make the metrics part look so simple. Don't think too much. Start with basics. Start doing something. Mature as it goes. And that makes so much sense because we end up doing so much of research and analysis and forget the basics. Like, at least get started and then you'll figure as you. So, when you were working in different levels of organizations, Paru, did you face challenges in terms of how to, measure health, or did you develop the entire concept on your own at different stages? Because it can be very different for a smaller company and very different for a really large company.
Yeah, I mean, I will say honestly, our first forays in health scores, like my first time doing it, I think we were really just trial and error. The problem with health scores is you have to like keep them in place for a couple of months, otherwise you don't know that what you've chosen is incorrect. So what at my old company, when I would say the first time I did health scores, we had a little foresight to say our enterprise customers behave differently than our other customers. So we already had, based on customer segmentation, pulled out certain segments. I'll just give you an example. Like our enterprise admins, we would talk to them constantly. They were not only engaged with us throughout the month, but they would meet with us, also multiple times in the month. So we expected those logins and those things, like their behavior, what they're actually doing in the product, to be high volume. We couldn't expect that for every customer segment. So we started to see some variation. And so we actually built health scores based on like admin behavior for this segment versus admin behavior for this segment. And then, that's just like one kind of element of our health score. But I will say it was pretty wrong, like in the beginning. And I think that's unfortunately, like, unless you really know the product inside and out. And I'll be honest, I knew the product, but I didn't know what did success look like. So it was really working through that. For me, I kind of developed like a list over time. I don't know where I keep that list, but there's factors that I sort of plug into a health score that I think are relevant factors for any health score that you can then change them up and like plug them in, but scale up the like sort of the level of that factor. So I use like things like I love CSM sentiment. I know everybody's like it's objective, but I just think it's so important. I love having so business results. So I look at, did the customer achieve their value? Do they, confirm with us like that they are achieving their value? If they don't, that you don't get the green. You get, various levels of that. And then we also would look at things like what's happening outside of like external factors in their business towards those business results. Like, did we hear they just had a terrible quarter? We might actually like downgrade their health score. Another kind of interesting one for me is advocacy. I think of advocacy as, are they willing to advocate for you, right? Simple questions. If the answer is not yes, then it's probably not going to be a factor. And I'm just talking about like subjective measures right now, not even the hard values. But then another one I would ask my team to do is engagement. Are they showing up to meetings? Are they paying their bills on time? So we often would have, like, I worked at a couple companies where the bill would be like delayed, by 30 days or 90 days. We'd have to dive in. So those would make the score go up and down. Those are a whole bunch of subjective factors, but I think to me, those can be like sort of applied in different formula to any business. And then we take the like sort of the metrics, the usage, and we say the utilization or actual behaviors that you expect to see in your product and plugging those in. I don't know, the industries I've worked in, typically we would focus heavily on like admin behavior, because the champions, the people that you expect to log in, if they're not logging in, you usually would think that's a problem. Not every single user is going to have 100% utilization. So we wouldn't always put that metric in. But yeah, it was like, it definitely was an evolution. And I think health scoring, even to this day, is probably a little bit reactive, a little bit lagging, right? And so to build those like forward-looking metrics, that's where I think like honestly the work that's being done with a lot of our platforms, like even Zapscale and others that are doing like AI, building AI to look at past behavior to predict future behavior, I think that is going to be really like super important, because unfortunately a lot of the metrics that we've had have been kind of like retroactive, right?
I am very positive about the new technologies. I think almost every platform is adopting it. So are we, of course. So I hope there are some amazing changes in the life of CSMs in future with all of these interesting things coming into the picture. The last question, Paro.
Yeah.
What not to do at different stages of scale? Because I think that is a very important point to think about. What could be like really disasters? Because what if you do things before it's time for you to do? It can be really, really harmful, and you may be focusing on the wrong thing. So at different stages of scale, what do you think they should not be doing, which can be really detrimental to the focus and growth of CS within a growing organization?
So what not to do? I mean, I feel like I think I'm going to answer this question backwards. I think the only way my brain is thinking about the answer. Like, don't lose focus on your business fundamentals. I think that like a lot of, especially early stage companies, they're so focused on the sale, they don't think about like what comes next. But what comes next is a holistic system. It's not just customer success. It's like your contracts have to be right, your pricing has to be right. And a lot of people say like, I'll figure that out later. And I think that can be really detrimental. So like lack of focus on your whole business process, even if you don't have like the resources to hire everybody full time, like make sure that you get stuff reviewed. Because I think what it does for CS teams 3 years later is it gives them cleanup. Most CS hires most jobs I've been in, to be frank, is like coming in after the company's been around for a while, when the renewals are finally coming up, and it's a lot of cleanup. And cleanup doesn't lead to productive work. It also sets you back. I always say to people, like, is your goal to retain your early customers, or are you just, spending resources to spend them? And the goal is everybody wants to retain those early customers. So don't lose your focus on, how to like, I'm just going to wow them with my product and my sales, and that's going to be good enough. Because I think the focus on business fundamentals gets missed a lot. And I think it's a super important part of what we do as CS people. I went to a talk here in Chicago that we did. It was like a talk, and a bunch of leaders were on the stage, and one of them worked at this company that's like doing amazing, like great NRR, great, growth. And the CS leader were like, what is your biggest challenge? And he's like, billing problems, because the billing systems are inconsistent. It's like fundamentals can drag your awesome workforce into the weeds. And so like I think really just like a focus on that early can be beneficial to any business, any stage. And I think like the other things not to do is like, don't try to give the job of CS to every other team. I think every other team should own customer success, but like a lot of times we're seeing like a mix of like, oh, the product team can be the customer success team, or the sales team can be the customer success team. I personally believe that customer success came around for that same reason that I started that first team years ago. The other teams really need to focus on, building the product, selling the product. And if you lose that focus, you also can cut down into your revenue. So give space for CS to be a function and give it a seat at the table, right? Because I think a lot of times that isn't always the case. So yeah.
Oh, Parul, I think I have talked to a lot of people. That is a very different perspective. It goes forward, Don't forget about your fundamentals, because you're making a mess for 2 years down the line when the CS team. And also get your CS team early on. Do not push CS jobs on different people in the team. And that happens a lot. That happens
Yeah.
a lot in early stages. And it could have come from someone like yourself who has been through all this pain in her life and in this journey. Thank you, Parul. I think this was one of the most awesome conversations I have had. Need more time to dig through your brain and get those nuggets out. You have a lot of experience, and I think a lot of practical experience can only bring these pointers, in terms of the things that you have faced. Like both these points that I've heard today, they are unique perspective. Unique perspective. Thanks.
That's really what I try to bring. Yeah. So thank you. I'm so glad to hear that.
I don't think you have to put in an effort. It just comes through.
Thank you
Or
so much.
thank you very much, Parul. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today. It's been awesome and very engaging, and I'm sure my listeners will have taken away valuable lessons. I appreciate you taking time to join us, and I wish you all the best for Success by Stage and your children's book as well.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks, Parul. And to all our listeners, thank you so much for joining today's podcast. If you like to connect with Parul or explore her work, I'll leave all the links in the description below, including her LinkedIn profile and other resources she recommends. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow and subscribe. Scale Tail Podcast on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. See you in the next episode soon. Thank you, Parul.
Thank you so much.